My father used to raise his glass at every family dinner and toast to the Harrison legacy, meaning my younger brother, Marcus. Not me. Never me. He once told a room full of relatives at our cottage in Muskoka that if he could have chosen, he'd have had one child, and that child would have been his son. I was 31 years old, sitting 3 chairs down, holding a glass of Pinot Noir, and I smiled like I hadn't heard him. I had heard him. I'd been hearing versions of that sentence my whole life. I pulled into my parents' driveway in Forest Hill on a gray Saturday in October, the kind of Toronto afternoon where the maples were on fire and the air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. My rental, a silver Lexus I'd picked up at Pearson that morning, crunched over the gravel circle in front of the stone house I grew up in. The house hadn't changed. Neither had the feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing pearls, a cream blouse, and the expression she saved for charity galas and dentist appointments. "Claire, you came. You invited me, Mom." "Marcus invited you," she corrected, already turning her back. "Your father and I expected you to be busy. Come in. Take off your shoes." Elise is a neat person. Elise, my brother's fiancée. I'd never met her. I'd been invited to their engagement party that evening at the Granite Club, and my mother had insisted I come by the house first so we could arrive together, as a family. The word family, in her mouth, had always been elastic. Sometimes it included me. Usually it did not. My father didn't get up from his chair in the sitting room when I walked in. He was reading the Globe and Mail, and he lowered it about 2 inches to look at me over the top. "Claire, you look tired." "Nice to see you too, Dad. Marcus is in the study. He wants to show you something." That was the extent of it. No hug. No "how was your flight from Vancouver?" No acknowledgement that I hadn't been inside this house in almost 3 years. I walked down the hallway, past the wall of framed photographs, Marcus at his Upper Canada College graduation, Marcus at Queen's, Marcus at his first day at the bank, Marcus and my parents at the Calgary Stampede in matching boots. There was exactly one photo of me in the entire hallway, and it was a group shot from 2011 where I was half cropped out of the frame. Marcus was at our father's old desk, scrolling on his phone. He looked up and gave me the grin he'd been giving me since we were kids, the grin that said, "I know I got away with something and you can't prove it. Claire Bear, you made it. I made it." Mom's been losing her mind all morning. She keeps moving the centerpieces around. He stood up and actually hugged me, which surprised me. Marcus had always been warmer than our parents. That was the confusing part. He'd been the golden son, the chosen one, the boy my father introduced to strangers as my pride, and he'd also, at times, been the only person in that house who remembered I existed. "Listen. Before we go tonight, I need to ask you something." "Okay." "Elise's family, is there a big deal, Claire? Her dad runs a private equity shop out of Calgary. Her mom sits on 3 nonprofit boards. They've got money. Real money. Old money." "Okay." He scratched the back of his neck. "Mom and Dad you know how they are. They want tonight to go perfectly. They want the family to look like I'm not in it." "Claire." "Marcus." He sighed. "Just don't mention the thing with Dad and the business, okay? Not tonight. Elise doesn't know all the family stuff, and I'd rather keep it that way for now." I nodded slowly. "Sure, Marcus. I won't mention anything." He relaxed. He'd always been easy to relax. That was one of his gifts. My parents had raised him to believe the world would rearrange itself around his comfort, and so far, it mostly had. I went back out to the sitting room. My mother had laid out tea. She poured me a cup without asking how I took it, and handed me a saucer with a single shortbread cookie on it, the kind of gesture that looked generous and was actually a ration. "Claire, darling," she said, settling herself across from me. "When are you going to stop with this little business of yours and find a real career? Or better yet, a husband?" I stirred my tea. "It's going well, actually. Thanks for asking." "Graphic design," my father said from behind his paper. "Hobby work." "It's not graphic design, Dad. It's whatever it is. Your brother just closed a $12 million financing for a mining company out of Sudbury. At 30. Do you understand what that means? I do, actually. Do you? I took a sip of tea. I do. There was a silence. My mother refilled my father's cup and gave him a look, and he went back to his paper. I sat there on that stiff green couch I remembered from my childhood, the one where I used to read after school, while my parents drove Marcus to hockey practice, and I counted the seconds until we could leave for the Granite Club. The Granite Club, for anyone who doesn't know Toronto, is the kind of place where the waiters remember your gin order and your grandfather's gin order. My parents had been members since before I was born. Marcus had his 16th birthday there. My sweet 16 had been at a Boston Pizza in Mississauga because, as my mother had explained at the time, the Granite isn't the right fit for your personality, darling. We arrived in my father's Audi, the four of us. My mother had made me change out of the navy dress I'd flown in with into a different navy dress she'd pulled from her own closet because mine was a little loud for the room. It wasn't loud. It was from Aritzia. But I wore her dress. I'd learned, over the years, that arguments with my mother about clothing were arguments about everything else, and I didn't have the energy that night. The ballroom had been done up in cream and eucalyptus. There was a string quartet playing something from a Disney movie I couldn't quite place. Maybe 80 guests, Elise's family, my parents' friends, a few of Marcus's colleagues from the bank. I recognized almost no one. Elise was standing near the entrance with Marcus. She was tall, dark-haired, pretty in the way that photographed well the kind of woman my mother had always wanted a daughter like and had not gotten. Marcus saw me and waved me over. Elise, this is my sister, Claire. Claire, Elise Thibodeau. Elise smiled. It was a polite smile, but her eyes were sharp. She was reading me, the way my mother had read me 100 times at the door of this house, and I found myself standing a little straighter. So nice to finally meet you, Claire. Marcus has told me. She paused, and then laughed a small laugh. Well? He's told me you live out west. Vancouver, is it? Vancouver. Yes. And what do you do there? I run a small company. Oh, what kind? Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my elbow with a grip like a bear trap. Elise, dear, your mother is looking for you. Something about the seating chart. Claire, come with me. I want to show you where you'll be. She steered me across the ballroom and deposited me at a table in the far back corner, next to a service door, through which I could hear the clatter of dishes and the raised voice of someone in a kitchen. You'll be here, she said. I looked at the place card. Claire Harrison, table 19. The service door swung open, and a waiter came out carrying a tray. I had a clear view of the kitchen pass. Mom. Yes? This is the staff table. Don't be dramatic, Claire. It's a perfectly good table. You don't know most of these people anyway. I thought you'd be more comfortable here. I looked across the room. The head table was on a raised dais near the quartet. My parents. Marcus. Elise. Elise's parents. 2 empty seats for her grandparents, I guessed. And 1 empty seat next to my mother. Who's the empty chair next to you for? She glanced over. Oh, that's for Marcus's best friend, Owen. You remember Owen. He's like a son to your father. Assom. Claire, don't start. She walked away before I could say anything, and I sat down. The table was set for 8. I was the first one there. Over the next 20 minutes, 7 strangers joined me, a distant cousin from Halifax I'd met once as a child, 2 of Elise's college friends who seemed to have been sorted into this table by accident, an elderly aunt of my father's who kept asking me if I was the caterer, and 3 others who didn't introduce themselves at all. I smiled. I made small talk. I drank water, and then I drank wine. Speeches began around 8. My father stood up first. He talked for almost 12 minutes about Marcus. About Marcus's character, Marcus's work ethic, Marcus's future. He used the phrase the Harrison legacy twice. He did not mention me once. He said, and I remember this word for word, because I wrote it down later in the notes app on my phone. When I look at my son, I see everything a father could hope for. Elise, You are marrying into a family with one true heir, and he is worth every bit of what you are bringing to this union. One true heir. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I took another sip of wine, and I watched Elise, and I watched her smile get very, very small for just a second before it came back up to the right size. My mother spoke next. Her speech was shorter. She talked about how she'd always known Marcus would find a daughter she'd always wanted. That one landed like a dart in a specific part of my chest, but I kept my face still. Elise's mother spoke after. Then Elise's father, a big man with a silver beard and a Calgary drawl, stood up and gave a warm, funny toast about his daughter. And then he said something that I had not expected. Before I sit down, I want to raise a glass to all the family here tonight. Every brother, every sister, every cousin, every aunt. Elise comes from a big family. She knows that a wedding isn't just two people. It's everyone who shaped them. So, to every member of the Harrison family, known and unknown to me tonight, thank you for raising the man my daughter is marrying. Elise leaned toward him and whispered something. He looked confused for a second, then scanned the room. She whispered again. He looked toward my table. I smiled at him, politely, and raised my glass. Dinner came. The food was fine. The aunt next to me told me 3 times that the salmon was a little dry. Around the head table, I could see Elise leaning over and asking Marcus something, and Marcus answering with a tight little shrug. I knew that shrug. I'd seen it 1,000 times. It was his "I don't want to talk about it" shrug. Dessert was being served when I saw Elise stand up. She smoothed her dress. She said something to Marcus, who shook his head. She said something else. Then she stepped down off the dais and walked, in her cream silk dress, across the entire ballroom to my table. The room noticed. The quartet kept playing, but the conversations near the dais dropped an octave. Elise arrived at my table and crouched down next to my chair, so that we were at eye level, and she said, very softly, "Claire, I'm so sorry. There's been a mistake with the seating. Please come sit with us." "I'm all right here, Elise. Honestly, you're not all right here. Please." She paused. "Also, I need to ask you something, and I'd rather ask it at the head table." I looked at her. She had very direct eyes. "Okay." I stood up. She did not take my arm, she was too elegant for that, but she walked beside me across the ballroom, close enough that everyone understood we were together. When we got to the head table, Elise turned to my mother. "Margaret, would you mind if Claire sat next to me? I'd love to get to know her better." My mother's face did something complicated. "Of course, dear. Let me just—" "Thank you." Elise was already pulling out the chair next to hers, the chair that had been reserved for Owen, Marcus's best friend, who I now realized had not actually shown up. I sat down. Marcus, on Elise's other side, was staring at his dessert plate. "Claire," Elise said, still quietly, but not so quietly that the table couldn't hear. "Earlier you said you run a small company in Vancouver. What's the name of it?" "Elise," Marcus started. "She doesn't want to." "Marcus, I'm asking your sister." I looked at her. I looked at my father, who was frowning. I looked at my mother, who had a fork full of pavlova suspended in the air. "It's called Northlight Studio," I said. Elise didn't react immediately. She picked up her wine glass, turned it in her hand, set it back down. "Northlight Studio," she said. "The one based in Gastown. That did the Banff Center redesign last year. And the brand identity for the new terminal at YVR. That's the one. And you're the founder." "I am." Her father, 4 seats down the table, had stopped eating. "Claire," Elise said, and her voice had gotten a little louder now, not angry, just clear. The way a lawyer's voice gets clear. "My father's firm has been trying to get a meeting with your studio for 7 months. Our family foundation has been trying to commission you for the Thibodaux Center in Calgary since February. Your team has been politely declining because the project brief didn't match your values." "That's accurate. My father flew here tonight thinking he might, eventually, through a friend of a friend, get an introduction to the mysterious C. Harrison who runs Northlight. She turned her head slowly toward my father. George, did you know your daughter runs Northlight? My father's mouth opened, closed, opened. Claire does graphic design. It's a Northlight studio billed $42 million in revenue last year, George. They just opened offices in Montreal and Halifax. Claire was on the cover of Canadian Business in June. My mother was going to drop her fork. I don't subscribe to. Marcus, Elise said, turning. Did you know? I knew she had a company. I didn't know it was that one. You didn't ask her, Elise said. It wasn't a question. Elise's father stood up at his end of the table. He walked over, extended his hand to me. Claire Harrison, Daniel Thibodeau. I can't tell you what an honor it is. I shook his hand. I was aware that the ballroom had gone almost completely quiet. The quartet had stopped between pieces and hadn't started the next one. Every face at the head table was turned toward us. Beyond, I could see guests at the other tables leaning over, whispering. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thibodeau. Daniel, please. Listen, I don't want to do business at my daughter's engagement party, but I do want to say, for the record, that if you ever took a meeting with us, it would be the highlight of my professional year. I'll have my office reach out. He laughed. Fair enough. Fair enough. He went back to his seat. Elise squeezed my hand, briefly, under the table. And then she stood up, lifted her water glass, and tapped it gently with her knife. The room quieted even further. The quartet stopped tuning. I'd like to make one more toast, Elise said. Her voice carried. She wasn't loud, but she wasn't small anymore either. When I agreed to marry Marcus, I told him the thing I cared most about was family. The way a family treats each other when nobody's watching. I grew up in a house where every child was a gift. Everyone. And it never occurred to me that anyone would grow up any other way. She paused. She looked down at me. Tonight, I learned that my future sister-in-law was seated at a table by the kitchen door. I learned that no one in this family has spoken her name in the speeches tonight. I learned that she has built one of the most respected design studios in the country, entirely on her own, and that almost no one in her family knows the name of her company. I want to raise a glass to Claire Harrison, my sister-in-law, a remarkable woman, and, I'll add, the only member of this family I am 100% certain I want at my wedding. Silence. She drank. Her father drank. Her mother drank. A few of the guests drank, uncertainly. Marcus did not move. My father's face had gone a color I'd never seen it go before, a kind of gray that made him look older than he was. My mother stood up. Elise, dear, I think you've misunderstood. I haven't, Margaret. Claire didn't tell us any of this. She's been secretive. I finally spoke. I had been quiet, I realized, for a very long time. Mom. You asked me in October what I did, and I said I ran a company, and you told me to stop playing businesswoman and find a husband. You did that in front of Dad. You did that while Dad was behind a newspaper. You didn't ask a follow-up question. You have never asked a follow-up question about my work in 11 years. Claire. When I was featured in Canadian Business, I mailed you a copy. You wrote back and said you hadn't had time to read it and had passed it along to Marcus in case it was useful for his career. That's not. I have the email, Mom. Silence again. My father spoke. His voice was quiet. Claire, sweetheart, we didn't know. You didn't ask, Dad. You could have known. It was on the internet. It was in the papers. It was on the cover of a magazine you keep on the coffee table of this very club. I looked around the room. I caught the eye of the distant cousin from Halifax, who was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. I caught the eye of Elise's elderly grandmother, who was smiling a small, satisfied smile, as if she had been hoping something like this would happen at some point in her life, and was pleased she'd finally gotten to see it. I stood up. I'm going to get some air. Elise, thank you. Marcus. I looked at my brother. He looked back at me. His eyes were wet, which surprised me. Marcus. You and I should talk. Not tonight. Soon. He nodded. I walked out of the ballroom. In the lobby, I passed a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. I took one. I drank half of it, standing by a window that looked out over the tennis courts, which were empty and lit up blue in the October dark. My hands were shaking. I hadn't realized. I heard footsteps behind me. Claire. I turned. It was my father. He looked smaller in the lobby light. I owe you an apology. You owe me a lot of things, Dad. I know. He stopped a few feet from me. I didn't, Claire. I didn't understand. I thought you were. I thought the design thing was something you did while you figured out what you wanted. I figured it out when I was 23, Dad. I'm 31. I know. You've had 8 years to notice. I know. Do you know why I didn't tell you? About Northlight, I mean. About any of it. No. Because I figured out, a long time ago, that you would only respect me once I had something you couldn't ignore. And I decided I didn't want to give you that. I didn't want my work to be the thing that finally made my father love me. I wanted you to love me before that. And you didn't. And so I kept it to myself. He didn't say anything. He looked at the tennis courts. Claire. Don't, Dad. Not tonight. I can't do it tonight. He nodded. He turned around. He walked back toward the ballroom. I stood at that window for a long time. Marcus came out eventually. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood next to me, and the two of us looked out at the empty courts. Claire. Yeah. I'm sorry. I know. I told myself they were hard on you, because you could take it, because you were strong. I told myself that every year, for 20 years, and I knew it was a lie, and I kept telling it, because it was easier. I know, Marcus. Can I call you next week? Yes. Okay. He reached over. He squeezed my shoulder. He walked back inside. I stayed at the window a little longer. I finished the champagne. I called an Uber on my phone and went back to the Four Seasons, where I'd booked a room under a different name because I hadn't wanted my mother knowing where I was staying. The next morning, I flew back to Vancouver. Elise texted me from the airport on her honeymoon 3 weeks later. She and Marcus went to Tofino, of all places, and she sent me a picture of the two of them on the beach at sunset with the caption "Thinking of you, sister." I cried at my desk for about 10 minutes. My assistant brought me a Kleenex and asked no questions. My parents sent a letter. A real letter, on the stationery my mother had used for 30 years, in my father's handwriting. It was 3 pages long. I read it once. I put it in a drawer. I have not read it again, but I haven't thrown it out either. Some days I think I will read it. Most days I don't. Marcus calls every Sunday now. We talk about nothing. The weather, hockey, a show he's watching. We don't talk about our parents, because there isn't much to say, and we don't need to fill the silences the way we used to. My studio kept growing. We did take a meeting with Daniel Thibodeau's firm. We ended up designing the Thibodeau Center in Calgary, a community building that houses a library, a daycare, and 3 nonprofits. The ribbon cutting was in June. Elise came. My parents were not invited. Marcus came alone, and he stood at the back of the crowd, and when I caught his eye, he nodded, and I nodded back. On the drive to the airport that afternoon, Elise asked me if I was ever going to forgive them. My parents. I thought about it for a long time, watching the prairie go by. I don't know, I said. I think forgiveness and a relationship are 2 different things. I might forgive them. I don't think I'll have them back. She nodded. She didn't push. That's what I love about her. She understood, immediately, the difference between a door being closed and a door being locked. Some doors are closed so they can rest. Some are locked because what was on the other side was eating you alive. Mine was locked. It had taken me 31 years to turn the key, and the only regret I have is that it took me that long. The last thing I'll say is this. I used to think I needed my parents to see me, in order to feel real. I built a whole life, a whole company, partly as a quiet argument with them. Look, now will you look? And the strange thing that happened at that engagement party, with Elise crouched next to my chair at table 19, was that I realized I didn't need them to look anymore. Someone else had looked. Someone kind, and sharp, and brave, had looked at me across a ballroom, and said, "You belong at this table, not that one." And once someone does that for you, once in your life, you stop needing the people who never did. Family, it turns out, is not the people who raised you. Family is the people who show up at the table, look you in the eye, and say your name out loud. And the rest of them, the ones who couldn't manage even that they can keep their toasts, and their legacies, and their hallways of photographs with you half-cropped from the frame. I don't live in that hallway anymore. I live in the light I made for myself, and the door behind me is locked.